Good afternoon. We are starting at 3:25, so we will, till what time do you have time? I allotted 1 hour, not 1 hour 15 minutes. Okay, so exactly 1 hour. And I'll be very generous in terms of donating my 5 minutes to any of the speakers if they need so. Okay, now very quickly, thanks a lot, Dr. Kelkar, for inviting me for this. He must have realized I am unreasonably literate in this particular field, being associated as an economist with banking. But these days, bankers are in everywhere, including grain finance. So therefore, I thought, and I can talk on this. As an economist, the whole issue we thought of solving the discount rate problem in the social planners optimization. In the sense, how much do you value for the next generation's consumption? If everything, I value hugely my sons, daughters, grandchildren, consumption very well, so should I make it zero or just my basic survival? So in some sense, various ways when we talk of, we try to look at this particular notion in our mind's eye, we try to solve this particular social rate of discount. Now, as we all know, lots of water has been spent on in terms of securing green future. We were aware of it since Nicholas Stern's report in 2006. Then Paris Agreement of COP21 changed all that, where the goal was to hold the increase in the global average temperature in the global average to well below 2% above the pre-industrial level, and to limit the global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Greenhouse gas emission must peak before 2025 at the latest and decrease 43% by 2030. So these are very lofty goals. And from there, we have come to a place when the COP28 summit has happened in Dubai, not exactly a very likely place where such an summit should happen, and it's happening. Yes, and we have, I have seen at least newspaper reports saying that 475 carbon capture lobbyists, I didn't know the term carbon capture lobbyist. So carbon capture lobbyists are attending COP28. And I have also heard a term called greenwashing. There are lots of greenwashing is going on. And I'm aware of that India was conspicuously absent from a list of 118 countries to pledge to triple in installed renewable capacity, energy capacity by 2030. So this is all this background, and I'm sure with all this background, we have two eminent experts. To my right, Dr. Gurdas Nalkar, and to my left is Ms. Anne Joshi, who is going to talk on all this. So who's going to talk first? You? Okay, over to you.
This is just a reminder because, Gokhale Institute is a legacy of economics, but being from the Center for Sustainable Development, we have a very highly diverse multidisciplinary capacity, and I can see Professor Pete looking at me that way when I said I'm not an economist. So I'll start my presentation. I want to make 5 points. One is I want to very briefly talk about the budgetary provisions for green growth in the Amrit Kal program. Next, challenges to current economic growth, and what is the focus that we have today on growth, challenges to be addressed, and pathways to. So these are the 5 points which I would like to make in the next couple of slides. I'm sorry, the font doesn't making sense in this large room. So if you look at the budgetary provisions in the green growth in Amrit Kal, the last year's budget, Nirmala Sitharaman talked about the Amrit Kal, and one of the focus themes there was the green growth. And it's talked about budgetary provisions for the green hydrogen mission, energy transition, renewable energy program for Ladakh, which is basically supplementing state budget, the Gobardhan scheme, the bio input resource centers, which is again a very laudable scheme, the Mishti, which is a mangrove initiative. I think probably we would be one of the only countries have been talking this in the budget, mangrove conservation and wetland conservation, Pranam, so on and so forth. So this is essentially the green growth provision in Amrit Kal. If you look at the challenges we have towards current economic growth, one is the international climate commitments are going down very heavily on us. India's stock of natural resources is depleting, and that is a problem which I argue is not being addressed in the Amrit Kal mission. Third is the import dependence for minerals, and I'll show you a list of minerals that we are completely dependent upon other countries. Encroachments by the development sector, infrastructure sector, on almost about 15,000 plus 30,000 square kilometers of forest land. And a large land parcels are turning uncultivable. They cannot be cultivated. They're moving towards desertification. And there's something I want to talk about also. If you look at the current focus in the budget, there is very strong focus on transition to renewable energy, which is very laudable and which is important. Agriculture waste is heavily handled in the Swachh Bharat mission and other programs which states are following. Natural disasters have been the focus typically because every month we are having serious natural disasters which are damaging the economy of the country. Pollution, air, water, soil, all the renewable resources pollution is being addressed. Forest and biodiversity to a large extent has been taken care of by the MoEFCC, and the challenges of urbanizations are also being handled in the current budgetary provisions. What are the unaddressed challenges? First is the resource depletion, which is not addressed in any of these things. Renewable resource economy, for which India has a phenomenal potential, and that is completely left to be addressed in there. And third is the degraded lands and desert. We do have a bond commitment. There was a bond challenge which was put up, and India committed to the bond challenge, but we still don't have a strategy or a plan towards that. So if you look at the GDP growth, I'm showing a GDP growth graph to a bunch of economists, which is, so please excuse me. And of course, this is a hockey stick graph. You will see the services sector and the manufacturing plus construction sector growing. But with that, if you look at the natural resources imports, right? If you, the red line is the fossil fuel imports, which is of course absolutely following the GDP growth. But the other imports, the minerals, non-minerals, biomass, and the other imports, they are staggeringly high. If you look at the domestic extraction of natural resources, that also has kind of is peaking out in the last few decades, in the last 2 decades. And this is directly correlated to the GDP. So every rupee of the GDP which is produced in the economy is consuming natural resources and is polluting renewable resources. So both of these are happening. So the non-renewable resources, the stock is depleting, and the renewable resources, it's getting polluted. If you look at the water, India is one of the largest water users per unit of GDP. And this, mind you, we are a monsoon-based climate. We get rains for about 3 to 4 months. These days, we are getting rains every month, but that's another question. So in a monsoon-based climate, we are so heavily dependent upon water for our GDP output is something which we need to do. And therefore, the challenge that we probably need to address, which is not, is how do you what do you do with the natural resources economy in the economy? So impacts, I'm not going to talk about the impacts, import dependence, rising natural resource prices. It's actually pulling down the industry competitiveness in at least some sectors. Critical mineral dependency, and especially if you look at this graph, again, I'm sorry that it's such a small graph. This is a list of minerals which we are critically dependent upon, and almost all of them are 100% being imported today. And all of these are being used in new technologies like renewable energy, batteries, storage, all of that. Right. So this is a very significant thing which we are pledging our economic security to imported minerals. Habitat loss, right? A degradation and desertification is leading to human-animal conflicts. A large chunk of farmer livelihoods is taken away by human-animal conflict. The ungulates are walking into the farms and eating the food. The tigers are following them, and there's a human-animal conflict. A large portions of land around the tiger reserves are not cultivated simply because of the risk of tigers and the ungulates coming out and eating them. And this is typically because of the habitat loss which is happening in 30,000 square kilometers that I saw. Waste generation is again a burden on the budget. And yeah, trade deficit. So if we keep importing stuff, if we keep stocking out, then we will have that. I have left a link there. The Indian Bureau of Mines has a list of exhausted mines in the country, and this list is non-trivial. It's about 397 mines which are completely exhausted of all its resources, right? So the point I'm making is the Amrit Kal provisions, while necessary, are not sufficient to enable the transition towards a green economy. That is the point which I'm trying to make here. And how would you go about that? The answer lies to what OECD had done in 2001, is how do you decouple the environmental bads from the economic goods, right? So natural resource consumption, how do you decouple that into a resource decoupled growth, and environmental impacts, how do you decouple? And that was the impact decoupled growth. And this is available in the OECD report of 2001. And later, subsequently, there's been a lot of charcha on this. And there's also been a lot of criticism on this. Yeah. So linear material flows need to turn circular in this kind of thing. I'm going to show you a little bit more about that. In resource decoupling, what is it that we could do in resource decoupling? First is raising the value add per use of resource. So every time a resource is used, can we improve the value addition there? Then we are directly contributing towards increasing the GDP without improving our resource consumption. And that is simply said resource efficiency. The second way is raising the number of times value is added to a resource, and that would be the circularity, the circular economy, right? If we are able to use copper several times in its life, because the life is infinite of copper, of aluminum, of steel, then we are able to add more value from the same resource, and then you decouple the resource impact. And the third is raising the renewable resource economy, and the biggest renewable resource economy that we have is agriculture, right? How do you add value to that? India, while not blessed with 12 months rainfall, we are absolutely endowed with solar capital. So we have the abundant solar energy, and we have large portions of land. So the idea is, how do you convert the degraded desertification lands into photosynthetic capacity? Because photosynthetic capacity will give you that punch which is needed to get into a renewable resource economy. And there are several examples, So for, resource efficiency, like I said, raising resource productivity, and we are very poor resource productive in water, for example. Flood irrigation is still practiced in so many areas. Sugarcane, there are so many farmers which are still using flood irrigation. Energy efficiency is very poor in the country, especially one of the reports says that MSMEs can increase their energy efficiency by almost 25%. So that's 25% reduction in thermal power generation if we are able to do that. Raising process efficiency. We still have a lot of industries which are using old technology and being wasteful of that. Life cycle productivity and efficiency is something which is not addressed. Higher value products. National resource efficiency policy. We have tabled that, but it's not. It's tabled as a draft in 2019, and it's still not come up. That needs to come up. So precision irrigation, energy, for example, in cement production, we have done fantastic in cement production. We have been able to reduce the energy consumption there. Stabilized zirconium is an example of increasing value add. We have large reserves of zirconium, but we are unable to make it converted into stabilized zirconium. We have to export raw zirconium at a lower price and import stabilized zirconium at a much higher price. So that is creating that inefficiency in that. And simply with that, we'll be able to raise our GDP without increasing. Circularity, recovery and recycling. Where do we have the infrastructure? Right? We're talking about mobile phones. We are talking about making phones cheaper and making them more available, but where are the old phones going to go? How is the recovery infrastructure addressed? We don't have anything there. Higher value add and recycling. So for example, right now, polyester bottles, all these bottles which you see lying on our tables here, they're going to go into recycling, and they're going to get converted into pellets and used back in polyester, maybe in fabric or something. If you want to add value, can you convert them into fuel? That will add higher value, that will save fossil fuel value, things like that. There are so many ways that people have innovated there, but we have not yet kind of addressed. Product as a service. For example, Cummins I remember Cummins was thinking of not selling a diesel generator, but selling the electricity that can be made out of it. So Thermax was talking about not selling boilers, but selling steam. And there are several examples how that is there. And you can take back these products and improve it into the next technology. Circularity in EV batteries, we have a recycling policy, but where is the infrastructure for that? So again, many examples. Agriculture raising added value is what Pradeep Apte also talked about and Bhushana also talked about. Substitution with renewable materials is a very significant way to innovate in India. For example, building and construction materials. Bamboo is so abundantly available and so easily growing in a country like India, and there are several uses of bamboo in structural materials. Biomass energy. This is the point which I wanted to make. If we are endowed with solar energy and if we are endowed with large tracts of land, can we bring them back into photosynthetic capacity? Can we grow energy plantations there? Yes, we can. Biomass briquettes, biomass pellets are something which are easy way out. It can, we will need some skilling there. We will need some human capital improvement there. But that is very easily possible. There are 3 states which have already mandated thermal power plants to use 5% of biomass briquettes instead of coal. Now, why can't all the states do that? Rajasthan has already started giving their private thermal power plants 1,000 acres of land for growing biomass. Napier, Super Napier, there are so many experiments which are done there. CBG, compressed biogas. Indian Oil Corporation, if you are putting up a compressed biogas plant, they will immediately sign a contract with you and buy the CBG, because they can supply it to their petrol pumps all across India. So there are Thermax's, for example, largest, fastest growing business today is selling biomass briquettes. So that's easily possible. The biotechnology, we have a phenomenal biological diversity in India. The Western Ghats, Himalayas, Eastern Ghats, everywhere we have endemic vegetation, and we have fantastic traditional knowledge about biology and botany. Can we convert that into biotechnology? Yes, we can. But where is the thrust in the policy circles to do that? So what I'm trying to, my contention here is, we are trying to regulate waste. We should move from regulating waste to regulating resource life cycle. What is the extraction, transformation, consumption, and waste management? Can we think in the entire life cycle of the resource in doing that? So the new economy, resource efficient, circular, and low carbon. Lessons from China, I'm not going to take a long time here. There are several lessons from China. 2005, they had the Opinions on Accelerating the Development of Circular Economy as a policy paper, which was seminal, which resulted in the 2008 Circular Economy Promotion Law. They have guideline documents, industrial policy, financial policy, tax policies, investment policies, and it boils down across ministries. So that is a significant focus on circular economy that China has. We have lessons from other countries too, but because of positive. And what do we have today? So we have this. This is what we have in circular economy: municipal solid waste, liquid waste management, scrap metal, electronic waste, lithium batteries, so on and so forth. All of this is about the end of the pipe. It's not at the mouth of the pipe. It's not addressing the problem of resource depletion. It's not addressing the problems of bioeconomy and what we can do in that. So what we don't have is the natural resource accounting. Where do we measure the natural resources? The national accounting. Every rupee of the GDP has expended some natural resource. It's captured in the GDP, but it's not visible to economists. That needs to come in there. The National Resource Efficiency Policy, which I just talked about, 2019, it was tabled as a draft report. Today, it's still as a draft report. And it's a good resource efficiency policy, mind you. Certainly, there are improvement areas, but no. Startups in circular economy and design for environment. This is very crucial. We have a lot of thrust on innovation. NCL has centers and venture startup, but something dedicated towards the circular economy, design for environment, and such things would actually give a boost in this space. There is sharing economy examples. There are apps which are actually addressing these kind of businesses. Fiscal policy measures to promote resource efficiency. A lot of countries today have it. Brazil has it. Sweden has it. Sweden reduces CO2 emissions significantly by very early carbon price policies. Recovery and recycling infrastructure. Again, government needs to intervene here. Green economic zone. We have an SEZ. How about a GEZ? Where we can actually practice circular economy, where there is resource recycling, material recovery, there is skill training, all of that consolidated in one green economic zone. Water circularity is probably the lowest hanging fruit, and we have done nothing about it. It's so easy for Pune city to reduce its water consumption from 25 TMC every year or whatever we are consuming to less than half. A Punekar gets 140 or 150 liters per head per day, of which we consume. The consumptive water is just about 5 to 8 liters. We drink water, we make tea and stuff like that, which means 130 liters of water is going back as sewage with chemicals added. Now, much of this can be recovered back, and we'll be able to reduce our water. So water efficiency and cutting across ministries, something which I've been always saying in the PIC fora, is that this needs to go beyond one industry. It just simply cannot be MOEFCC or Ministry of Commerce or one other thing. Everybody has to be linked within it. So yeah, that was, hopefully I got in time. Thanks.
That's very good, very comprehensive and holistic idea. Critical mineral dependency, how to reduce that, how do you improve the photosynthetic capacity, how do you regulate resource life cycle. Those are very, very important points. Now over to you.
I'll just speak from here because I don't have a presentation and it's just more comfortable like this. And also it's easier to see me for the people sitting this side. I must say that even though you say you're not an economist, you very successfully did what economists do best, which is talk about multiple complex sectors with ease and confidence. So that is something that I wanted to say. Yeah, but I think the point that I want to make is that it's important to have that goalpost of greener, but in the next 10 years, we're also struggling with a green future. Like many of those ideas that you said make a lot of sense, maybe in India of 2035 or in India of 2040 or 50. And probably a lot of that work needs to start now, but I don't think we can also assume that a green future is something that is very secure, given the fact that a lot of implementation challenges are even there today. So I wanted to talk a little bit about medium term, rather than many of the aspirational goals that we need to have, because I think having green helps us to go greener. So let's talk about getting green first. So I think it's very important that where possible, as you mentioned, we should think about decoupling economic growth with natural resource consumption. But it may not always be possible, and we need to look at what the alternative is. So you talked so much about renewables and how it increases our import dependency. But at the same time is the alternative that we have today, if it is not renewables, is coal. And we're talking about 1 kg per unit of emissions through coal, as opposed to 95% less through solar and 99% less through wind. We are talking about 4 to 5 rupees per unit for new coal, whereas renewables is available for 2.5 rupees per unit. So that value add that is there from that electricity which comes is going to be much more if it's from renewables, therefore increasing the value add of many of the competitiveness of our industry and the production in the country, because a lot of it is going to be based on energy. We are talking about as much as land requirement is another very, very important thing. For renewables, actually, if entire country is running on renewable energy, let's say in the near future, we're talking about 1% of India's land. So it is not as land intensive either. Water definitely, but think about the kind of water that coal uses. So when we really think about a renewable energy future or a green future, I think it's also important to think about the counterfactual and what resources we have today. So in that context, if you have to think about a future where we are moving more towards renewables, right? Practically that means that all our new demand, let's say India's demand is doubling. And that's going to happen in the next 10 years, because many of these challenges that you're talking about, we have to work towards. So we are facing, let's say, double of India's demand in the next 10 years. And if that has to be met by renewables, we are talking about 450 to 500 gigawatts of renewable energy. And we are, I think, currently at about 170 gigawatts. So that challenge itself is quite significant, and the scale is so huge that we have to have decentralized, centralized solar parks, everything. Like there is no one solution. We need to have all of this. And the biggest challenge, I think, which electricity service providers are really facing is renewable energy is variable, it is intermittent. How do we really ensure that integration with the grid happens? So, everybody says, what's going to happen when solar is not there in the evenings or the night, or wind, is not available. So therefore, investing in storage technologies is very, very critical and important, right? But where are the price signals for that? I mean, that is what is really, really critical and important if you want to take this forward and ensure that the political concern that is there and the economic concern of ensuring reliability is prioritized. And that happens best if that particular service is priced, because reliability is very, very critical, and that's where I wanted to come. I mean, if we really feel that renewable has to be scaled and it has to be done in a sustainable manner, it is also important to recognize that there is an economic proposition to renewables. It need not have concessions. That is a way that we discover, we have innovation, we have competition, and we get industry to do what it does best. We get to different ways of innovating. So I think the era of concessions that are being provided to renewable energy and to renewable energy services need to stop, because it has reached parity, and that would lead to better innovation. And one clear example I can give of this is many of these technologies that we're talking about, which are supposed to go with green, like green hydrogen, which you had also talked about. The proposition is that, the distribution companies, which are currently mostly public, are going to be used as the batteries, right? So when these continuous process industries require energy, when renewable energy is not available, it is to be provided by the distribution companies. But at what cost, right? Is it being provided at the cost that it costs the distribution companies to procure this power, or is it provided at a concessional rate? Which means that it is normal consumers, probably agricultural and domestic consumers, who are actually cross-subsidizing this service. So I think it's very important that if this concessional service is not provided, and it's actually unbundled and provided at cost, it incentivizes industry to really take storage as a serious proposition, an economic proposition, and it provides that incentive for the market to discover that price, which is not there currently, because we are essentially depending on these utilities to provide this service, which ideally storage should provide. So that's just sort of one example that came to my mind, where we really need to think about what kind of incentives to be there. And if you're really thinking about moving to a greener future, I think it's also important for states to articulate that vision. We had an exercise within our office where we looked at different states in India and their policies. We always talk about a top-down approach when it comes to target setting, etc. But states also don't have a comprehensive energy policy where they look at what kind of targets need to be done. I mean, I would really be happy if a state says, we want to go the biofuel way as opposed to the electric vehicle way, because you can't have both, right? And to some states, it may not make sense to go the biofuel way if agricultural land is very, very critical and land is needed to grow food. So that kind of prioritization is very important for states to do. And I don't see many states currently in the process of having a long-term vision, looking at various trade-offs which exist with any kind of choice for the future. So we've seen Rajasthan come up with a draft energy policy. Karnataka is also in that process. So there are early steps, but I think that comprehensive vision from states is very, very critical and important. And that's a great place to sort of provide these price signals for investments to take place based on their own economic proposition. The other important thing that needs to happen is, for any transition, it will be good to align it with the developmental imperatives that already exist. I'm sure none of us are thinking about green for its own sake. We are thinking about green to meet critical developmental challenges that exist today. And I can talk about two examples, of something like this. And Maharashtra is kind of the leader in that. I mean, you're talking about agriculture, right? So agricultural supply itself is quite expensive. It costs about 7 rupees per unit to supply to an agricultural consumer. And large part of it is actually subsidized by the state government. But there's a scheme to solarize agriculture at the feeder level, such that the cost comes down to by 50% or so. So the cost itself of supplying to agriculture, and therefore the subsidy requirement is reduced by half, which also helps a lot of these farmers get power at daytime, right? Which is a service kind of developmental imperative that they had. So earlier they were getting power at odd hours when electricity was much cheaper, and now the state is able to provide power at the daytime. And the plan is to have about, 7,000 megawatts installed by 2025. So Maharashtra state is the pioneer in that in the country and accelerating it. And there's a national program also called Kusum to sort of go in that direction. Another good example could be to look at, using storage technologies. I mean, many utilities say this is untried, not tested, it's imported. But batteries are modular, they're scalable. Maybe we could think about having storage technology or batteries at hospitals, district hospitals, where reliability is a major concern, and reliability is not provided today. So as a test case, having instead of a diesel genset, having a storage facility which can also be integrated to the grid, provide multiple services, at prime health centers or even district hospitals where reliability is a major concern. So I think these sort of innovations are also needed if you really want to accelerate many of these green options. And I think it's also important to recognize the winners and losers in any transition. So, how are taxation revenues really flowing? When we are moving from one sort of resource to another, what is happening with livelihoods? And all of that. So I think it's a very, very complex task. We all know what to do, but I think the moment we think of one sector and we get into it, we realize there are very, very complex trade-offs. And that's why an integrated energy policy at the state level will make a big difference. And I'll stop with that.
Thank you very much. That's very, very comprehensive presentation. We all learned that we need to have value added in renewables. Yes, land requirement is a major concern. In case of power, integration with grids are very important issue. And interesting to see that in at least Ms. Anne has talked about stopping the price incentives. I believe once the incentives are there, it's very difficult to take them away, and then you get all sorts of illustration from wrong sorts of countries. And of course, state statements is a very important thing. The lack of long-term vision, like anywhere else, it's absent in case of energy as well. And of course, we need to relate green to development imperatives. But that's a long list. But finally, what I liked is the issue of winners as losers, and that has to be linked with the state's vision as well. Okay. It's open to questions. Yes, please.
Recently, I attended the Life Economic Conference in Delhi. That is an important issue to be taken on board here. Life is this campaign which has been launched by the Prime Minister for living environmentally friendly, and that then reflects on your energy consumption as well, as one of the factors that we need to look into this. And one of the recommendations which my working group made was to go before the Finance Minister with a life and a green budget. So your slides are excellent, which will be happy to take it forward. Now, secondly, an important thing, and which and Gurudas, which you have not addressed, is reduction in consumption. For example, now you can have like LED has been an tremendous sort of movement. You didn't mention it. LED has led to a huge reduction in energy consumption, and it's happening throughout the country. So that is one example. I'm sure there'll be more technological such examples. You're looking at electric vehicles, etc., which can lead to reduction. So overall, if you look at green budget or life principles, then you're looking at frugality and looking at, as to how frugal you can be in terms of your consumption in order to reduce the environmental burden, and therefore you reduce your energy demand. Thank you.
So just a quick response is my first box was about improving resource efficiency, which is basically reduction of all the losses there. And the second was about looking at reducing consumption. Yeah, I didn't read out all of them, but one of that was that. But I just touched upon it. I mean, this was basically for the industry.
Yeah, I read aside, but when I make a PowerPoint, I ensure that every sentence is readable. You know, normally, I mean, Partho, just to say a very important observation that I find in many of the events is that we design PowerPoints without understanding that it's not a magazine page. It's something visible. You don't need to have too many graphs or tables and all that. You just get lost. It doesn't make sense. So, broad lesson that to be taken. If you saw my slides, there's not a single line which could not be read.
Thought was triggered by what you said about reduction. I think one thing that we keep missing out is reduction from what? And I think probably in many of the sessions, I mean, I only sat for one before, data becomes a very common thread. Whether we are really measuring, many of these energy or, green kind of certifications, etc., is very, very critical and important. So even in the context of energy efficiency, the PAT scheme, whether actually measurements are there and the penalties for compliance are high enough. Because unless those are there, it's a problem. So I think having a good database, because that will be the biggest starting point for even what you're saying, right, in terms of budgeting.
I'll just add to her point. Very recently through PIC, we made a proposal to the Pune Divisional Commissioner for this point. We don't have data on climate. We don't have data on carbon emissions and all the. So now they have instituted a carbon cell at the Pune Divisional Commissioner's office. So PIC has led that entire effort, and we are very closely following.
Yeah, this is a question for Gurudas, but maybe both Partha and Ann can answer this. See, India has very heavy taxation of fossil fuels, I think among the highest in the world. And the people who are trying to advocate for transiting to green energy are happy about it because they think that's one way to disincentivize fossil fuel usage and go towards net zero commitment. But the opposite camp, there are many arguments. One is that, of course, that India is the second or third largest abundant, has the second or third largest abundant resources of coal. And for the foreseeable future, if we want to improve the standard of living, more people should have access to electricity. And there is just no getting away from 60 to 70% of the electricity to come from coal. Secondly, the fact is that this excessive taxation of coal is in the of fossil fuel is increasingly in the form of cesses. And for example, in the last 4 or 5 years, 21 or 25 lakh crores, 25 trillion rupees have simply gone to the central union government, and the state governments have no access to it. So, to that extent, there's concern. Thirdly, that even if India does all this exertion, huffing and puffing on climate, actually the big change will happen only when the large countries, which much larger aggregate carbon footprint, do something about it. So India's huge amount of exertion, including a negative impact on our standard GDP growth, will only move the needle in an aggregate sense by a small. I mean, if others don't do it, if China and the US just don't do anything significant, then it won't move the needle. And last point is that for most Indians, the concern is about air and water quality. Really, it's not about CO2 or ozone. So it's a very local issue. So actually, if you address that, but that has nothing to do with what you're talking about. So I've given you 4 points, but I wonder, you can respond whichever point you want to.
Very quick rejoinder to Ajit. First is, I had no illusion whatsoever that the high tax on carbon-related energy has anything to do with the substitution, expected future substitution between renewable and non-renewable, or between coal-based and others. Anyway, our coal is of very poor quality. Second is, definitely any kind of growth is energy intensive. So if it is energy intensive, and if the dirty energy is cheaper, then somewhere we need to have something. There's no free lunch. So where from this will come, this is altogether a different question. But on the issue of, yes, US and China are the two guys who are there, but we are going to be the third largest economy.
Right. So just one quick response. You know, that's the reason why this entire just transition business has come up. That we have thermal, we have coal, and we need to give a better life to so many people who do not have access to energy. So we can't just shut off our coal power plant, and therefore the just transition program, which is being handled, is happening. For a very long time, we thought that hydroelectricity was green, but today we know that it's not green. So you know there are huge issues. For example, the number of dams in the Ganga, Meghna, and Brahmaputra basin have completely arrested all the silt deposition in the Sundarbans, and the ecological productivity as well as the livelihoods of people in Sundarbans has drastically reduced in the last just about 10 years. So a lot of these green technologies that we thought of as green technologies are no longer green. It's probably greener directly to burn timber, you know, wood, lakud phata apan manto, you know, in rural India they still burn that way. Of course, it's more polluting for the near people here. But the biomass briquette and the biomass pellet program, which I was talking about, that is a very significant implication, because when you burn coal, you're essentially releasing carbon which was sequestered about 100 million years ago, just after the Cambrian explosion, 540 million years ago. But when you burn biomass pellets, we are essentially releasing carbon which was sequestered in this season of harvest. So that way we are improving to the net zero capabilities of the country, which we need to realize there. And that should be a significant driver of thermal power in the coming days. But yeah, I completely agree about the fossil fuel and the taxation structure here. It's not fair to a lot of people who cannot afford that quality of fuel.
What about Gobar?
I just wanted to add 2 points, and Ashok is here. He's done a lot of work on coal taxation anyway, so probably he can add. I just wanted to say that on one hand, the cess itself is supposed to be used for GST compensation at the moment. So ideally states should be getting it. I know it's not, but it is supposed to be allocated as for GST compensation. And even without, I mean, if you're thinking about coal versus RE, without looking at variability and availability, the price differential is so significant that even without the taxation structure which currently exists, coal is still not as economic, and from a price point of view. We're talking about almost a 50% difference, right? The third point that we're talking about is when we talk about the kind of cesses, concessions, etc., I think it's also important to look at land, water, many of the other things that are being provided to coal power plants, which also were concessional. And the important distinction between coal and renewables, and this is something that we really need to debate going forward, is that the price of coal is going to increase going forward, whereas many of the renewable energy technologies are inflation proof. And in fact, I would say they're deflationary in their tendencies as well. So from a consumer point of view, if you're really thinking about competitive supply, maybe renewables is something that even consumers will choose, which is why there's been such a demand for open access, right? Where commercial and industrial consumers, I mean, even smaller commercial and industrial consumers, not just large industries, have been demanding across states that they be given choice and not to get power from their utilities, but to actually to be able to sign third-party contracts or to invest in their own captive renewable energy plants in order to procure power. So the market itself is showing that even without taxation, coal does not seem to be the choice which consumers are going for.
I want to make a couple of points and then one suggestion for Gurudas. As I mentioned in the morning, I'm going to request all the contributors, if they want to, in the light of this discussion, revise the papers and send it for putting it final. If we're going to do that, then 2 points we may wish to consider. One is make the simple recommendation, which is just start green accounting. First, if you want to remove something, you must account it. I mean, that's the starting point. Fortunately, Professor Partha Dasgupta has given a beautiful report. He's come to doable. So that should be the first starting point in terms of policy action. Second policy point, which can be sort of perhaps can be mentioned, I would personally argue, that nuclear power or nuclear energy is one of the best solutions for all this dilemma. And now the mini nuclear plants are now emerging a very, very viable technology. And India has a competitive advantage in terms of doing this in a very large scale manner. So this cuts many of your trade-offs in terms of cost, in terms of the emissions, etc., etc. And finally, I want to tie up, and we should come to the session which Harsha laid, and I think point should be made. You know, at least I grew up, brought up on this beautiful song of Sujalam Sufalam. I think we are not. We are resource poor world. So only way you can do this by trade. So India, that's why I was mentioning, India has much more aggressive position of world trade. But this is how you have to complement, reduce your resource poorness. So I think it's very important to ensure that why we have to become far more trading country. Because that's the only way you can reduce, overcome the constraint of this Sujalam Sufalam, which is really not India. India is resource poor. India is resource poor, I think. We must understand, given our size in terms of population. So some of the things you may wish to consider when you want to revise it, because it's very important to start educating that this closed economy is not the model. We should not disintegrate. What is the word? The delinking is not in India's interest. So India has to be at the forefront of open economy, global economy, because that's where I think you enlarge the possibilities in terms of. I will stop.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. And my compliments, Vijay, to the thoughts you have come up with. They are very, very interesting and substantive also. So, all three speakers, my compliments. I have three very short questions. One is, you are saying that carbon should not be taxed, etc. If I understood you right, and that because of the market itself is the price of renewables is such that you don't need to tax carbon. Is that right? I can't hear you.
I was only making the point that the existing tax is not what is making carbon not competitive. That's all. I wasn't advocating that carbon should not be taxed.
No, because the reason I asked this question is because now you have international measures like CBAM, etc., which actually look at, and ultimately the process will take into account how much you are taxing carbon. So it is not just the issue of how you are managing the prices here, but there's an international dimension to it. Second, I noticed that you said that the use of renewables need to be accelerated. But at the same time, you said no need now to subsidize renewables because the market price is such. But if the first statement is valid, it means there is a social need for greater use of these within a shorter time period. That's what a subsidy does.
Yeah, but support can be provided without subsidy. And all I'm saying...
No, what you are saying is there are better methods. What are they?
Yeah, so for example, having facilitative environments for renewable energy producers to invest better. So I would say if state governments are able to provide a solar park in every district, right, that would really help sort of ensure that economies of scale is happening. Take up programs for decentralized generation, like the Maharashtra example of 7 gigawatts in 2 years. That's a phenomenal acceleration that a state has taken up, all through competitive bidding, no subsidy, no provision, to meet the direct demand for agricultural consumers. Okay. So storage. So I'm just saying state can play more of a facilitative role and also ensure that the frameworks are very, very clear. Like in renewables, we've seen a lot of examples of retrospective applicability of many rules. So investors don't have certainty in terms of what regime is there. And in renewables, it's very, very critical because all of your investments happen upfront. It's just capex. That's it. right? You put up a module, you put up a turbine, and the O&M is very less. So everything is upfront investment with very little variable cost. So having that kind of certainty over a longer period of time and clear frameworks is much more what is required rather than a regime where there is a provision of subsidy and there's also uncertainty on whether that is going to continue or not.
The last point about certainty, I 100% agree with you. It's valid not only for renewables, but in general. But I would think that till you have actually replaced the conditions in such a way that renewables are available through these other policies, you need to keep on encouraging the use of renewables. I mean, just because there are other policies which the state can follow, doesn't mean that the need for acceleration at the moment is not valid.
It should not come at the cost of other consumers or crowding out other investments. I mean, if we really need to accelerate renewables, great. Let's have more competitive bidding for and ensuring that transmission investments come.
Why can't you do the two at the same time, and when you reach a turning point,
if we are a
then you shift
poor,
out. If you shift it out right now, I think there'll be a hiatus which will then which will halt the acceleration which you're talking about. You're presuming that that acceleration will continue with these other schemes irrespective. That's the way I see it.
All I was saying was we have limited resources and it is best to ensure that investments take place so that acceleration
I agree with you.
happen.
I'm not disagreeing. But all I'm saying is that takes time. Therefore, it's more complex than just saying because it has reached a situation of more, competitive pricing, the need for acceleration has gone off. You need to accelerate it now. My third point is, and it's a question, because my understanding is that the purpose of this entire event is to suggest to the political party what to do. You have given a very rich presentation. If one had to actually tell the political parties, these are the three things you must do, what are they?
Yeah, so first is, like I said, foremost, which is the most important, is natural resource accounting in the national budgets, which is, that's the first point on that slide. The second point is that enabling framework for circular economy, which is completely absent at the moment. And that is going beyond the MOEFCC. It's talking about a lot of other things. And the third and the most important is retiring the GDP and looking at some other indicators of human well-being.
Very interesting. I think we are hugely running short of time. We have a very interesting discussion. Three things comes up. There could be solutions in terms of technology, markets, and institutions. And there are trade-offs between the current generation and future generation, between the current growth and sustainable future growth. And I'm sure the policymakers have to grope in the dark and end of it with something like, 7 blind men and the elephant. Thank you very much.